Hey everybody, Motley GM here. In this second video of my NPC creation series, I'm focusing more on the villains, the BBEGs, or whatever you call the main antagonist or threats in your game that aren't just another monster. We're going to focus more on motivations and a little bit about backstories in this video. And this one is for the newer GMs out there, but all are always welcome. If this is your first time stopping by, then hey, thanks for stopping in. Before I go forward, I'm not paid for any of this, and everything you see on the table here, I have purchased myself. The books on the table that I'm featuring today, illustrated Bestiary by Yochai Gal and Oozejar, and Wanderings, a Gothic roll and read table by Geek Gamers. Both awesome in their own right. Little inspiration here for you, a little eye candy for you as I'm talking about villains and their motivations. But when we talk about villains and the BBEGs, as they are often called, this can range from a single reclusive person to a close small group and all the way up to armies and other large groups. Now, I think a lot of people have fun creating the aesthetic of a villain because, of course you do. For some GMs, creating who that villain is can be tricky. That's where motivations and backstories can come in. And the three categories that I personally use when I'm thinking about creating villains. Now, in most cases, even the largest armies have a leader that they follow. But on the flip side of that, even a singular leader will still have those who are close to them, advise them, protect them, do their dirty work, etc., etc. This video will mostly focus on that singular villain and perhaps a few considerations for their trusted advisors or someone else that might be close to them. If your main antagonist is a large group, here's a quick tip. The larger the group, the more villains you need to prepare. Keep that in mind when creating your main villains. Now, a quick side note to my GM kin out there. GMs beware. It is easy to kind of favor a villain that you create just because it's something you really, really like. That happens to all of us. I'm not going to hate on you for that. You might do things like doing everything in your power to make sure they don't die. You might give them really overpowered abilities or items. So I won't go into everything you could do, but avoid doing this, my GM people. Villains are supposed to, at some point, be fodder for the party, generally speaking. At least that's how I usually see it. No matter how much you like your villain, even if they're a long-standing villain that's been there for a very long time, know that they will eventually and most likely die at the party's doing. And that's kind of the point. Don't get too attached, GMs. There's always new villains waiting to rise up. But hey, let's move back onto what I was talking about. In my personal game, when I'm preparing characters, lore, or any kind of world building I might do, I often try to think of a few categories that I can break things into that I can pull from then and get a base idea of what I'm trying to prepare. In this case here, I'm thinking of creating villains and or maybe some of their cohorts. So in true MGM fashion, I will describe my personal three categories and try to give you some inspiration as I go. I hope this might help you as it has me, even if only bits and pieces of it do. My main three categories for villains are over-the-top villains, villains motivated by selfish desire, and villains motivated by good intentions. Now, there's many other ways to do this, of course. This is just something that I came up with that simplifies it for me and makes it a little easy. I'm kind of just giving you a peek into my brain and how it works. But all those basics out of the way, let's dive a little deeper and look a little bit closer into these three categories. My first category is over the top. And in my experience, I feel most people don't cover this or think it's lazy or just don't really like it a whole lot. I disagree with a lot of those people, and I admit it. But despite all that, if you also look at the fact that in real life, there are some people that are just jerks. They just choose to be that way. They just want to be the jerk. They want to make people suffer. Those people exist. Now, this over-the-top category first implies that there's little real motivation other than the want to cause misery and suffering to others. In the realm of tabletop RPGs, I think these individuals make great over-the-top villains. Think Ming the Merciless, or even a plethora of villains from old-school kung fu movies if you're into that kind of stuff, and shout out to you if you are. I don't really think this villain type really needs a whole lot of depth. I mean, you can, of course, but they don't really need it as much as they don't have a goal other than the suffering itself, the destruction itself, the pain and problems that it causes itself. That's what the goal is. You can really think of some of your reclusive mad scientist or wizard types here. Some bullies might fit into this, or even your Joker, chaos for the sake of chaos types. They might all fit well into this particular villain category. My advice is to take this villain and make it as wonderfully over the top as you'd like, and just have fun with it. It's not really supposed to make much more sense other than this person sucks. I personally feel these are the most fun to create and the easiest to make for like a one-shot or a mini adventures. Hey, let me know in the comments your favorite over-the-top villain you've ever seen in a movie or read in a book. When we think about henchmen or anybody close to this villain, I'd say it's rare, and think of them at really well-paid men at best, just doing their job. I mean, let's face it, some guy like this really can't keep people around them very much and tend to be reclusive and loners, which is why they're so over the top and why you can have so much fun with them. At least that's the way I look at it. Otherwise, think of things like constructs or robots or some form of created or manufactured servant/soldier type that might be more plausible choice for this type of villain. Looking at backstories for this type of villain, you can really lean into the idea of maybe that spoiled child who had a good life but still had a bad attitude. Taking that spoiled rich kid and turning him to somebody who was bored and just decided he liked to hurt things and people is a good start as well. Think of that selfish brat that despite having a really good and cool family, still themselves continued to be a selfish brat or even a violent bully, only because they could and they could get away with it. It could even be somebody that decided to become that type of villain, that type of over-the-top villain, after achieving a certain level of power or getting a certain something that gives them power. Have as much fun with these backstories as you do with the villains themselves. Add in some quirks and maybe even an embarrassing flaw or two to give them some of that extra flavor, and off you go. On a quick aside here, guys, flaws and quirks are things I discuss in my creating and playing player character video. Here, I will simply say that a flaw is a limitation, bias, vice, phobia, or something that causes a problem that must be overcome. Where a quirk is more of a tick, a like or dislike, a catchphrase, or something else that is unique to the character that might not necessarily cause a problem. But if you want that broken down a little bit more, check out that video I was talking about. Alright guys, moving on to my second category, we're talking about villains that are motivated by selfish desires and or ideas. As the category name implies for this second category, the motivations for this type of villain would be selfish in nature. Things like revenge, to fulfill an obsession, to gain power and control, or to influence that power in their favor. Basically anything that's going to benefit them, usually at the expense of others, stuff like that. Yes, these will typically be the type that are seeking power above all. But power in this case is really just a means of control over others, which is what this type of villain is truly after. This need, want, and entitlement to power as a form of control over others is central to this type of villain. This group of villains is where you might find your megalomaniacs or your cult or group leaders that see themselves as the object of worship instead of upholding worship of something else. You might find crooked politicians here in any type of political structure. Basically anyone seeking a power that gives them some kind of control over others. The thing that sets them apart is their extreme and unwavering selfishness. They may even be very charming, but they don't care who is actually hurt as they gain the power they desire, and they demand total loyalty from those who follow them, but offer absolutely none. They see themselves as the rightful head of others and have very high opinions of themselves, as you might expect. They may have a trusted group that surrounds them, but I would keep this group pretty small, as this villain type tends to be constantly suspicious of others. They will gladly betray anyone, including those in their trusted inner circle. They may or may not outwardly give their true intentions away, and may even look as if they're doing good things. But underneath all of that is a selfish ambition and entitled pride that drives them to succeed at all costs, especially if they can ensure that the cost is a burden to others and not themselves. Now, these villains differ from the over-the-top villains because of their extreme selfish ambition and pride as their core motivation. This is opposed to the merely destructively chaotic for the sake of itself mindset that the over-the-top villain would have. I think that villains that are really obsessed with something as an idea, an event, a perceived wrong, a group, etc., that they can really fit well into this category too. This almost subclass of villains in this category will serve only the selfish obsession. A villain who became the way they are due to a lost love is a common trope that happens in this idea that I'm putting out here, but I think you get the picture. Obsession fits into this model really, really well. Now, when we look at the closed group or those people that might help protect this particular villain, you're going to find people who are very strictly loyal to their leader. And I mean very strictly. They are very obedient and loyal typically because that's what they feel gains his trust and his affection. Many of them may have been charmed into believing the leader is a parent-like or mentor-like figure, or at least a trusted friend, no matter how abusive that relationship might actually be. Consider creating those that might be close to this villain as similarly selfish, and who may seek to even take power from that villain themselves, or at the very least enjoy the power that that leader bestows upon them. Conversely, you can also think of creating characters of people who were easily manipulated or even forcefully manipulated into that type of servitude. There's way too many possibilities for me to name everything, of course, here. I'm just throwing out a few ideas to get those creative juices flowing for you. Throw your ideas or thoughts in the comments below. I think when you're creating backstories for this type of villain, including opportunities in their past that gave them a demonstration of what power of leadership bestowed upon those who wield it could do, and how that shaped those selfish ambitions. Don't forget to add in one of those quirks and flaws I was talking about earlier, other than just the selfish obsessions, to flavor that villain and make him stand out from the crowd. Alrighty guys, my third and final category for villains are villains motivated by good intentions. Now these types of villains within this category may be good people motivated by a good cause. I mean, they might be somebody that was working to stop the poor treatment of a marginalized group or the poor. Perhaps they were rallying against unfair government practices or the abuses of local cult leaders to the outsiders or even the members of that group. Maybe they were protesting the destruction of a natural place or places, or the stripping the land of too many resources. These villains are typically motivated by wanting to correct or fix what they perceive as an injustice or wrongdoing. They may even have a genuine want to help people who they see as suffering. Now, somewhere along the way, they lost their focus on their original activism. For example, perhaps they started as someone who led a revolution to free an impoverished or mistreated group, only to become one who sees that group as the only right group at the cost of all others. Perhaps they started as a champion of a forest, only to devolve into the destroyer of civilization. Maybe they started by learning powerful destructive magic or gaining access to some powerful weapons in order to defend themselves and their family, only to use those very same tools of defense to threaten and take power, thus becoming the one that others must now protect themselves from. To overlap a little bit with the previous category, you might also get a religious leader in this particular villain type, but their intentions were different. They may have wanted to become a leader of that religious cult or political group because they truly believed in the cause, only to become the tyrant they once railed against. The key is that at some point along the way, this villain lost the more noble focus of what they originally did or tried to do and became very singular-minded without regard for anything or anyone else. The "you're either for us or against us with no in-between" type of mindset may be applied here quite well. Now, despite how cold they may be or have become, they still do tend to have more closeness to their trusted group, and they will tend to have an unwavering dedication to the cause that they support and the people that are a part of it. This particular group of villains is a little bit different because of the more selfless origin of this villain and the fact that they may still be that selfless person within their group. They may be a very funny, kind, generous, and genuinely caring person on every account, but as soon as it comes to somebody that's outside of that group, the same can't be said. Or at least that's how I define this group as being different. When we think about loyal companions, protectors, and those in inner circle of this group, you may typically find that those followers have a great deal of admiration for their leader. They often may see them as the savior of their cause, although some may be concerned about the leader's direction as time goes on. These types of loyal followers are more likely to fight hard and with more ferocity for the cause that they believe in because they have more deep-rooted beliefs and experiences that bond them to each other and to their leader. These are the types that will be very difficult to persuade away from that group. They'll usually be very loyal and very strong in that loyalty. Looking at those backstories when we're thinking about these villains, you might ponder what caused them to take up their original cause. As stated before, most start off as, and may still very well be, good people who truly and deeply care for a particular group, place, or idea that they witness being abused or oppressed in some way. This started the path of action that eventually caused them to become a reflection of those they wanted to stop. Always remember to add some flaws and or some quirks to make them stand out just like all your other villains. Now, when we bring all these things together in the end, there really are as many ways to flavor any villain from these categories that I'm suggesting as there are imaginations to perceive it. I'm sure each category in itself can spawn other subcategories that they can spawn theirs and so on and so forth. On top of that, the system, genre, and type of game that you run can also influence the villains you create. Here at the Motley GM channel, I like to keep things simple, and having this 3-category system helps me focus the choices I make when creating a villain, no matter the genre or system. But what about stats, Motley? Well, that depends on your system. My go-to advice is to take an existing stat block that is close to what you want and tweak it to fit your villain. You can always stat them as you would a player character too, and give them abilities and all that. That takes longer, but all that stuff and how you do that is up to you, GM. Are you a GM that might have a couple of tips for newer GMs when creating villains? Sound off in the comments below and let the people know what you think. My way of doing this is definitely not the only way. I'm just sharing kind of how my brain works here a little, like I was saying earlier. And I hope that something I said here might stick and help you a little bit at least. As with all of my videos, take what I say with a grain of salt. And I encourage you to look around and see what others say on this topic, even if they completely disagree with everything I say. Piece together a way to create villains that make sense for you and your game, and don't look back. Don't want to create a villain from scratch? You can always take villains from adventure modules, books, movies, or other existing media. You could also use roll tables or online generators to make even quicker villains. It's all open at your personal table and what's going on between you and your friends. Well, guys, that's about all I think I have for this video. I want to give a big shout out to you subscribers out there. You know who you are, and I really appreciate you. I can't tell you how much more fun this is knowing that there's over 500 of you that listen to me. I think that's really cool. So thank you so much for being who you are. I also want to give a slightly bigger shout out to my players at my table who always challenge me to create a villain that can actually survive their onslaughts. I cannot wait for the upcoming campaign. If you haven't been here before, welcome and thanks for checking me out. If you like tabletop RPGs and supplements that aren't children of corporate overlords, then check out some of my other stuff and let us know your thoughts and opinions. Remember, my GMs out there, villains are the main spice that gives your adventure or campaign the necessary flavor for a successful game. Don't let yourself get too attached to your villains, though, so you can remember to play for fun first. Thanks for watching, everybody.